are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Joins me remotely is Zeeshan.
Yo.
Alright, man, so we're basically around or nearing the midway point of this shortened NBA season, and we're kind of getting an idea of what teams are kind of in the running for a championship and what teams are kind of, sort of heading for the lottery, to be nice. So in this episode, we kind of wanted to just dive into some of the teams that are near the top, that are, gunning for a championship or have championship aspirations, and kind of break down to see, are they actually true contenders or are they just pretenders? Now, there are a total of 6 teams that we feel are in the contendership bubble. Those teams are in the Eastern Conference: Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Boston. The Western Conference, we have the Utah Jazz, LA Lakers, and LA Clippers. Now, we're not going to waste your time and talk about, Brooklyn, the Lakers, and the Clippers, just based on the fact that we already know that they are true contenders in their own right. Just to quickly touch upon them, Brooklyn, you have Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. Enough said. Like, you're truly in the contending portion of the league, man. Like, there's no question. It's just a matter of, can they get to that stage? Can they actually get to a championship? That's the whole question with Brooklyn. So they're a true contender, no doubt. Then the Lakers, obviously, you have the best player in the world in LeBron. The Lakers have been playing very well this season, and they're the reigning champs.
Well, minus as of late, but
as of late, AD is still hurt as well, but you have
Shooter's out because of COVID.
Yeah, but either way, like, the Lakers are still a good team. They're still the reigning champs, and when you still have LeBron James, you're always a contending team, even if you're the garbage Cavs and somehow LeBron gets you to the finals. I don't know. So yeah, the Lakers definitely contenders. And then finally the Clippers. Clippers, obviously, you can make jokes about how, they had way off P in the crew last season. They choked against the Nuggets, but this season you're seeing it. We all knew they had the talent to be a championship level team, and we're seeing it this year. So you have still Kawhi, you have Paul George, even you have now Serge Ibaka. You have some good pieces around them. So the Clippers are still a championship contending team. Once again, I think it's similar to Brooklyn, is will they actually ascend to that level? And again, we will know that once the playoffs arrive. So those 3 teams we know are for sure contenders. But it brings us to the other remaining teams that we want to talk about. And it's kind of interesting to see, because some of these teams are doing very well. Some of these teams are actually not doing pretty well, but they're still in that conversation and they're still actually pursuing a championship as organizations. So we wanted to break down these teams, and we'll start off with the Philadelphia 76ers, and I'll let Zeeshan take it away.
Yeah, just to touch upon your point too as well. Like, these 7 teams that we named are all, obviously, they have championship aspirations, right? Nobody's doubting the fact that they're at the upper echelon of the league, right? They're these 7 teams that are legitimately gunning for a championship. Everyone else is kind of, a fringe or out of the championship window. But as we're gonna see, these teams, I think we can still classify as whether or not they're, as Hani said, contenders or pretenders. Now, again, based off of the general definition, these guys are all contenders, right? Because they all have championship aspirations. But we really want to deep dive and break down if each team is truly, in our opinion, a contender, or are they just, on that fringe aspect of the league where they have championship aspirations, but we just don't feel like they can get it done this season. So as Hani said, I'll start off with the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, the Philadelphia 76ers, after, their interesting offseason, have been playing very well. They are currently the first seed in the Eastern Conference. I'll talk about this with another team later on too, but the Philadelphia 76ers, I think they're an interesting team, right? So they added some veteran presence, right, with Danny Green and Dwight Howard. They picked up some more shooting, especially again with Danny Green, especially with Seth Curry. Um, and then, they have a new coach in Doc Rivers, right? So when you take all of those into account, those are definitely upgrades over what they have, especially their coaching staff, right? When you're talking about, we've had our criticisms of Doc Rivers, right? We've definitely had our criticisms of Doc Rivers, but there's no denying that he's a substantial upgrade over Brett Brown, right?
Yeah.
There's no denying that. So when you add in all of those factors, and add in all those pieces that they got this offseason, there's no doubt that they should be better this season. But there's still a number of questions that surround them, and a number of things that have happened to them this season that have helped them to get to that first spot in the Eastern Conference and made them look as impressive as they are. The first factor we have to talk about is Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid has been an absolute monster this season. He definitely looks better. He looks like he's taking that next step. We've mentioned it previously in some of our episodes past as well. He definitely looks like he's taken that next step in his development. Joel Embiid is a bona fide MVP contender as of right now, and he looks amazing. Another guy that stepped up very well for them, and which we should have, I think, well, we kind of saw it, but we should have probably seen it a bit more, is Tobias Harris. We know he's had his best career years under Doc Rivers. When you think about his LA Clippers year, where he was almost an all-star. So it's no surprise that he's having a great season once again with Doc Rivers, and he's taken that second option on offense for the team. With all of those points, you can say, oh, what's the questions about them? They just look like a better team. That's, it's pretty simple. It's not as simple as that, right? First of all, they start out with a relatively mild schedule, right? So if we're being honest, they haven't played the best of teams. As we know, the Eastern Conference is kind of seriously not as good as the Western Conference this year. And again, it is a very weird season, so everyone's just like all over the place. But the Eastern Conference, for a fact, has not been as good as the Western Conference when we're looking at them record-wise. So the Philadelphia 76ers have had a relatively mild schedule. That's number one. And then, so they've definitely improved their scoring and defensive outputs. However, if we want to be true to our opinion of what they are, we have to look at what they were last year, right? And if we're being real, their ratings are about the same last year. So in the 2019 to 2020 season last year, they had an offensive rating of 111.3, which was good for 13th out of 30, right around middle of the pack, while their defensive rating was 109, which was 8 out of 30, and that was in the top 10. And their net rating was a 2.4, so that was literally 10th in the league. Whereas this year, we see that they have a 112.6 offensive rating, which is an increase from last year, but comparing it to this year's teams, they're at the exact same spot. They're 13th in the league, right? So they technically haven't gotten any better, even though they are scoring more points. And then defensively, they have a 109.9 rating, right? Which is worse than last year, but it's actually better in terms of the ranking wise. They are one spot ahead of last year. They have the 7th ranked defense in the league, and they have a 2.7 net rating, which is 9th out 30th. So they're still a very good team, but if you compare them to what they were last year, where there was a number of people had criticisms of them last year, including us, they look about the same, if we're being real, with the exception of Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris, right? They still have the same turnover issues. They're ranked 28th in the league. It looks like maybe Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid might never figure out how to stop turning the ball over. It kind of looks like it at this point. Their bench is still hit or miss. They are 5th in scoring, but if we look at what they are as a team and we look at the games, their bench is a bit hit or miss, especially if you go down the line of their names off the bench. Guys like Dwight Howard, who was brought in there to bring more stability to that big man spot after Joel Embiid leaves the game, has kind of been hit or miss. He's kind of not being great for them. Seth Curry has cooled down significantly from the beginning of the season, all right? And again, I think a lot of the issues that surround them are the same as last year, where they have the same issue of which 76er squad is going to come to play each night. And we saw this with the Raptors, as Raptors fans, right? That first game The Raptors played very well against them. Philly just did not seem like they wanted to be there. Whereas in the second game, they had a significantly better start. Now, the Raptors did weather that and played well against them in the second half. But we saw what Philly can be. It was a tale of two halves, right? And so it still seems to be the puzzling question with Philadelphia. And the most confusing thing, I think, if you're a Philly fan, is what do we actually make of this team? Like, which version is going to show up? And that's a recurring issue since last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I see you stand with the Sixers, and I've been very critical of the Philadelphia 76ers, and I think mostly it had to do with roster construction. And you mentioned before, like the ratings have kind of been very similar over the past 3 seasons, and that has a lot to do with the fact that your main two options, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, have been constants, and you know that they're great. Especially on the defensive side of the ball, they're both great players in their own rights. But Embiid has looked a lot better this season, and that's been a major factor as to why, although ranking wise, they don't look like a different team, but they're performing as a better team because of the fact that Embiid's taking that step up and in turn elevating his team in the process. But I do want to touch upon, obviously the fact that you did mention, they do have some of these issues still, and one of them is which team will show up. To me, that's been a recurring theme with the Sixers, but I think now that the roster is constructed better, and now you have a coach who's utilizing these guys better, like utilizing Ben Simmons in a role that he's doing very well in this season. For his standards, Tobias Harris is doing very well, and Embiid's doing very well. And I think overall, as a whole, that puts the Sixers in a better position to succeed. Now it depends on will they put the effort to do so. That is yet to be seen. But I think a key element that I've seen with the Sixers this season is that they can play multiple different ways. They can play small, they can play big, they can stretch the floor, they can play inside. And I think that's something that I noticed a lot with them, and I think, at least for me anyways, I think that's a big reason why they're in the position that they are this season.
Yeah, like as you were saying, right? Though the stats don't exactly say that they're much of a different team, I think the eye test matters, right?
Yeah.
And we can both say this as Toronto Raptors fans because we do see Philly 4 times a year in the Atlantic, I guess 3 times this year, right, in the Atlantic Division. The eye test matters, and Philly looks significantly better. They look like they know how to weather the storms of the game, right? Whereas before, you saw if the opposing team went on a run, Philly would kind of deflate, and they would roll over sometimes.
Yeah,
a lot of that has to do with the veteran presence that they added with guys like Danny Green, Dwight Howard, a capable shooter in Seth Curry, and the coaching presence that they have now, right? Whatever you want to say about Doc Rivers, he still has a championship under his belt. He knows how to get that far, right? So he has that requisite experience. Whereas we can see, especially during the latter stages of his tenure, Brett Brown was probably hated by everyone in Philadelphia, including the organization, the players, the fans. Like, nobody liked him, right? Everyone had huge issues with him, which was what contributed to guys like Jimmy Butler and JJ Redick wanting to get out of there. So for that reason, again, we're not the biggest Sixers fans, especially since we're Raptors fans, but for those reasons, the veteran leadership, and the coaching change, as well as the fact that nobody in the Eastern Conference can realistically stop Joel Embiid. There's nobody in the East who has a center that can match up well with Joel Embiid, especially given how well Joel Embiid is playing and how assertive he looks this year compared to where he might have drifted in and out of games last year. He looks like a dominant presence this year.
Yeah.
And so with Joel Embiid playing like he is, and the Sixers and their new pieces, my verdict for the Philadelphia 76ers is actually that I would put them as a legitimate contender coming out of the East.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there on putting them as a contender. And I think you touched upon it mentioning of Joel Embiid, that not many of the other teams in the Eastern Conference can really stop Joel Embiid. You look at a team like Brooklyn, they don't really have a big man that can keep up with Embiid. They have DeAndre Jordan, but I would take Embiid over DeAndre Jordan any day.
DeAndre's washed. Let's be
Exactly.
real.
So there you go. So Brooklyn doesn't have one. Milwaukee, Brook Lopez or Joel Embiid. Once again, I'm taking sorry. I was about to say Brook Lopez. No, but I'm taking Joel Embiid in that matchup as well. Then Boston, Daniel Tice. I mean, Boston has gave Philly some fits, but I think Joel has kind of grown past that over the past couple of seasons. So when you kind of look at the contending teams in the Eastern Conference, Philly has, an advantage that a lot of the other teams just don't have. And a lot of people say the big man position is dead. Well, Philly clearly has the combat to that, and also they have a lot of wing talent. They'll have a lot of length that I think defensively puts them in a position where, they could realistically be be a contending team that can compete.
I think one more thing I want to talk about that you mentioned, I think I kind of glossed over as well until you said it, is their adaptability this year, right? They can play multiple styles. They look comfortable playing different ways, however the game goes. Whereas before, if they didn't run their style, you could see if Ben Simmons bringing the ball up the court and then, having Joel Embiid in the post. If you didn't have him doing that, then they would significantly deflate. Whereas this year, as you're talking about, they can adapt on the fly in games.
Yeah, but I mean, overall, man, the Sixers have been great this season. I think it's safe to say that they are actually true contenders this season. Now we'll see what happens in the playoffs, but Philly's been performing pretty well this season. Which brings us to the next team, and this is another Eastern Conference team that we need to bring up on whether or not they're a contender or a pretender, and that's the Milwaukee Bucks. Now the Bucks have been in the championship hunt for the last few seasons. Ever since Giannis established himself as a superstar. He's won back-to-back MVPs. He's the Defensive Player of the Year. He's one of the best players, one of the best bigs in the Eastern Conference. And Milwaukee has always had a few things. They have a solid system. They have a good supporting cast. They have a pretty competent head coach in Mike Budenholzer. And they played well on both ends. Like this season, they're 4th in offensive rating, 10th in defensive rating. So you can clearly see that this is still like a good team on paper. And they still have nice young players. Like I like Dante DiVincenzo a lot. I think he's a good player. They picked up Bryn Forbes from San Antonio, another good pickup for them. So Milwaukee has always shown themselves to be a competent organization. However, they've really been only one thing, and that's really just a floor spacing team that lets Giannis suck the defense in only to give him opportunities to kick out to open shooters. And it's kind of, over the last few seasons, been pretty easy to stop. We saw that in the 2019 playoffs, the Raptors were able to shut down Giannis and basically, as it's now called, the Canadian sweep, the Milwaukee Bucks. They literally won 4 straight games while being nice enough to give you the first 2. Very Canadian. But all jokes aside, it was pretty simple it was pretty easy for the Raptors to slow them down. You just put bodies on Giannis and you force the role players to beat you. And even this season, you notice, and again, I know a lot of you are going to say, oh, why are you picking the homer picks and picking only that Raptor game? Well, the Raptors do an amazing job at containing Giannis and the Bucks. We saw it evidently where Giannis, although he drops 30 points, but those are never really easy points for him to get. And then not to mention the fact that Chris Middleton's also an easy player to shut down. It really just leaves to the fact that if Milwaukee wants to win, they need the role players to beat you if you take away Giannis. So that's been a glaring issue for the Bucks over the last few seasons now. And then I just mentioned Chris Middleton. Their secondary scoring has been pretty hit or miss. And Chris Middleton's a decent player. This season he's averaging 20 points, 6 rebounds, around 6 assists per game. But he's not really stepping up to be that true go-to secondary scoring option that the Bucks actually really need, especially when Giannis is shut down or Giannis is being contained. You need that outlet in Chris Middleton, and evidently in his last 8 games, he's like, look how fluctuating his numbers are. 18 points against Phoenix, 18 points against Utah, 23 against Oklahoma City, 11 against Toronto, 13 against Toronto, 20 against Oklahoma City, 32 against Sacramento, 13 against Minnesota. So it's very up and down. And it's just not good enough, and it's not consistent. and he really doesn't do great against pressure. Like the Raptors really highlighted the fact that you pressure Chris Middleton, he will make a lot of mistakes. He'll throw the ball away, make a lot of bad turnovers, and just overall just be pretty ineffective for his team, especially when they need him the most. Then we gotta go to the Bucks defense, which credit to them. This season they've been experimenting a lot with their defense. But first of all, no rim protection whatsoever. Like Giannis is your best rim protector, or Brook Lopez. But again, you take those two out of the paint, there's literally no rim protection whatsoever. And they're just points where the Bucks just basically switch on every chance they get, which is just not a sustainable game plan defensively. Case in point, against the Raptors, Brook Lopez switched onto Van Vliet like 5 or 6 times, and Van Vliet just burned him because of the fact that, and it was all just like willing switches. Like Bryn Forbes would willingly switch off of Van Vliet and leave Brook Lopez on an island. That's not sustainable for the Bucks. And then you got to also move into the fact that the Bucks have other problems where, they may not have the firepower to keep up with other teams in the Eastern Conference, like Brooklyn, because again, if the 3-point shot isn't falling, or if Giannis isn't able to get to the rim, and dominate, the Bucks struggle to put up points. So although they've been decent on paper, I see a lot of holes with them. And one last thing I'll do before I hand it over to Zeeshan is the Bucks haven't beaten a good or a legitimately good playoff team yet this season. They lost to Boston, they lost to Brooklyn, they lost to Toronto, they lost to the Lakers, and they lost to the Utah Jazz. And they've also been playing in a relatively soft schedule, mainly playing teams like Detroit and Oklahoma City a bunch of times. So yeah, the Bucks, I don't know, I'm kind of in the middle with the Bucks.
Yeah, the first thing to say about the Bucks, and the thing that everyone knows is, build a wall to stop Giannis. That's the number one game plan for everyone, and it seems to still be working. You want to point to the Toronto games, we saw that firsthand.
Yeah.
I watched the LA game, the Lakers game earlier in the year. The Lakers did the exact same thing. And especially when, like, LeBron wasn't guarding him every possession, but when LeBron switched on Giannis and was like, "Yo, you're not scoring on me," Giannis couldn't do anything, right? Because LeBron, when he wants to be that defender, he can. And Giannis, unfortunately, doesn't have any really go-to moves. He doesn't have a repertoire on offense that he can use to work around guys who don't get bullied like LeBron, right? Giannis can't bully LeBron, so Giannis has to go to his counter moves. The unfortunate thing is Giannis doesn't really have any counter moves, right? So he can't do nothing really to LeBron. So that's the general point about the Milwaukee Bucks that we all know, build a wall to stop Giannis. And again, it seems to have been working. But diving into some, more points that other people don't really talk about as much. You were pointing to it, you're alluding to it with the Raptors game, right? Their defense. Their defense is still a top ranked defense in the league, but we can see it's not the same defense that they've had in previous years. Now, again, as you're saying, a lot of that has to do with Budenholzer trying to experiment, implement new principles into his game plan. However, again, as you were saying, if you look at them and you watch the tape of them, a lot of the defensive principles that they're trying to implement have kind of been butchered, and have kind of been messy, to say the least.
Yeah.
Case in point, a guy like Brook Lopez was a big reason why in the past 2 years Milwaukee has had the success that they've been able to have, especially in that first year when he came and he was hitting like 40% of his threes, being a defensive player of the year candidate. Brook Lopez, unfortunately, kind of looks his age this season. It looks like he's kind of fallen off a cliff. And we know that the thing that was so impressive about Brook Lopez is that he completely changed his game. He was never known as that kind of defender. But now this season, it seems like he's kind of regressed into what he was before, in terms of the fact that there's a number of plays where you can look, just in the couple of games that I've watched, where Brook Lopez has absolutely butchered the defensive game plan that Budenholzer is trying to implement, where he's so used to just dropping back into the paint, he's letting people get wide open mid-range jumpers, whereas Budenholzer is trying to make them switch more. Or Brook Lopez switches unnecessarily, right? You were talking about Bryn Forbes and Brook Lopez not knowing anything what to do. Speaking of Bryn Forbes, he's a great 3-point shooter, but he's a liability on defense. And that's kind of been an issue with the rest of the role players outside of Drew Holiday, and Giannis and Chris Middleton. Chris Middleton again has kind of been hit or miss, but he is what he is, right? We kind of know what he is. Whereas the other role players like Bryn Forbes, Bobby Portis, Torrey Craig, what are you going to get from them? And if they're being inconsistent as they have been, Milwaukee does not have a great chance because of the fact that Giannis is not a offensively gifted player, right? He's not going to be able to drop 40 points at will. So you're going to need some of that secondary scoring. And if Chris Middleton isn't able to provide that, outside of Drew Holiday, what are you going to have with this Milwaukee team? So in my opinion, I think for me, I'm going to unfortunately say Milwaukee's a pretender, but what's your verdict?
Yeah, I mean, like that's like I was actually just getting to that. Yeah, I'm saying Milwaukee's actually a pretender, and you actually touched upon. I actually totally forgot to even mention Drew Holiday because he's had COVID for the last few weeks, so he hasn't actually been playing.
He's been good, but yeah.
I even took a peek at Drew Holiday's numbers. They're not really as eye popping as people would expect it to be. But again, when you're getting maybe 16 points and 20 points from your second and third options, and that too, it's hit or miss a night, it's not as sustainable as you would want it to be, especially when it comes to the playoffs where things are going to slow down. Defenses are going to key in on some of your best players, and Giannis is going to expect double and triple teams. And when guys like Middleton and Drew Holiday and, like you mentioned, the role players aren't stepping up, they might not have enough to keep up with the other team, with like a Philly or a Brooklyn. And that, not to mention one more thing about the defensive end of things. I don't think the Bucks defensively have the tools to even, kind of match up with a team like Brooklyn. Like, for instance, like you'd put Giannis on Kevin Durant, so that takes Giannis away from the basket. So that's one thing, so he can't protect the rim. Then what would you do? Put Chris Middleton on James Harden? And then Drew.
Well, I mean, you would kind of have to, because Drew would probably be on Kyrie, because that makes the most sense. But then, that's the danger of Brooklyn, right? So you have two great defenders in Giannis and Drew Holiday. Who's going to take that third guy in James Harden?
Exactly.
You're asking a lot from Chris Middleton, right?
So, but here's the argument I can make for Philly is that at least they have the length to do that. Like you can throw Ben Simmons, then you can maybe throw a look of Embiid, then you can throw a look of Matisse Thybulle. Sure, maybe throw Danny Green, Tobias Harris. Like, you have a lot of guys you can throw at Brooklyn's big three, and you can switch up the looks as well. Now, I don't know how sophisticated Doc Rivers' system is to do that, but they have options where Milwaukee just doesn't. And I think right now, I don't see them winning a championship.
One more thing we didn't even talk about, because it's kind of obvious at this point, but Mike Budenholzer also gets coached every single playoffs. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, he gets outcoached by Nick Nurse too, but that's nothing new for us now. So
he gets outcoached by everyone, if we're being real.
Yeah, so at this point, I have to say Milwaukee's a pretender. So, but we're gonna have to see what happens with them heading into the playoffs this season. Which brings us to the next team. And again, I have been heavily, heavily critical of this team, and I'm not gonna apologize because they are doing they're playing like shit, over the last few weeks.
This makes us happy as a Raptors.
It makes me very, very happy. But I do have to acknowledge that the Boston Celtics are among the teams pursuing a championship this season. There's no denying this has been a lackluster year for the Boston Celtics. Especially this last stretch of games. Like, they fell below 500. They just got blown out by the Atlanta Hawks today. And
after blowing a 24-point lead against New Orleans.
After blowing a 24-point lead. So Boston is, in a lot of trouble as far as the standings are concerned. But there's no denying they have great talent and they have a very good coach. I mean, they're 15th in offensive rating, 14th in defensive rating. So, again, it's not really eye-popping, but again, you do have to factor in that Marcus Smart is also injured. So that also skews the numbers in a different way. But this year, you've seen Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been absolutely fantastic. They've been absolute studs this season. They've, really deserved and earned their All-Star nominations this year. And they're only getting better, which is the scary part. They're 23, 24 years old respectively. Or maybe 25 for Jaylen Brown. So...
something like that.
super young players, man, and they're only getting better. So that Boston has them. That Brad Stevens has shown he's had a great system that he utilizes his wings to be able to guard multiple positions, and for the most part, it works very, very well. Like as Raptor fans, we've seen it firsthand how frustratingly good the Celtics are defensively, just based on the fact that they can switch anything. They can switch Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, then Jason Tatum. They have that that core of guys that they can use in multiple different scenarios. Um, and especially like when Marcus Smart is healthy, the Celtics have an amazing, amazing defense with Tatum and Brown. And it makes them a very strong and capable defense. Over the last few seasons, you've seen them in defensive ratings. Like last season, they were fourth in defensive rating. The year before that, they were seventh. The year before that, they were first. So you can kind of see the Celtics have always been a very, very good defensive club, and you know that's been a staple for them. But they also get good production from their decent production out of their role players. They get the most out of guys who they find. Whether or not, like, if it's a Peyton Pritchard or if it's a in their case a Grant Williams, a Robert Williams, Time Lord. So Boston always, or Semi Ojale. So Boston always finds a way to get some decent production from the role players. The problem though with the Celtics is, can they keep up offensively with teams like Milwaukee and Brooklyn? Because they can hold their own defensively. I don't see Boston having trouble on that side of the ball, especially when Marcus Smart gets back. But when they are forced to have their role players win games, they aren't really able to keep up. And what I mean is that when we get to playoff basketball, you highly expect Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum to be double teamed at any chance. Then Kemba Walker has struggled this season, so we don't know how good he's going to be. And I don't think he's going to be able to fix it because I think he's playing through an injury, and I don't see his production improving this year. So that's another wasted option. So now you're forcing guys like Marcus Smart, you're forcing guys like Robert Williams, Grant Williams, Semi Ojale. You're forcing these guys to step up and beat you. And, it depends on the night. Some nights Semi Ojale just catches fire and can't miss a three for whatever reason. And other nights he's absolutely garbage. And same thing you can say with Grant Williams, Robert Williams, Peyton Pritchard. So that's the major problem. And, this season, they don't have as good as depth as they had in previous seasons. In particular, they don't have Gordon Hayward anymore, who was, again, I think a lot of Boston fans really, really undersold his impact for them, because you lost him now, and you can see how well he's playing for Charlotte. And now you don't even have Terry Rozier anymore, who, again, you lost him to Charlotte. Wow, you gave up a lot of guys to Charlotte. But you can see you gave up on some of these guys, and you don't have the depth you used to do. So are you able to keep up? And that's kind of where I'm at with Boston. I think for me, where my verdict stands is I have to classify them as a pretender, just because they're just missing that extra piece, that extra offensive weapon that can truly take them to that next level.
Yeah, I think you touched upon it. They've Brad Stevens has managed to get as much as he can out of guys like Semi Ojale and Grant Williams, and Peyton Pritchard. Though again, Peyton Pritchard is a rookie, so I'm not gonna really talk about him that much. But guys like Grant Williams, Semi Ojale, Daniel Tice, Time Lord. Time Lord's been pretty decent as well throughout the season. But he's been able to get some production out of those guys. The problem is in playoffs, when role players are expected to step up even further, how much production are you going to be able to get from them, right? Those guys are not the most talented guys in the world. They've gone to the point where they are because of playing gritty, hardworking basketball. But we know you need some talent on your team. You need some depth, and that's what's really lacking for the Boston Celtics right now, especially when you have your heart and soul of the team and Marcus Smart missing games, right? Now, do we know Marcus Smart's a very impactful player for the Boston Celtics? Yes. I don't think anybody expected him to be this impactful for the Boston Celtics, or maybe he's just not that impactful for the Celtics. Maybe the Celtics are just stinking it up, right? Maybe he has a great impact, but not to the extent that the Celtics are this bad without him. And as you talked about, Gordon Hayward is not there anymore. You don't have a bench piece like Terry Rozier, Marcus Morris anymore.
Yeah, him.
So you're missing some players that you once had and helped you fill out your depth now that you don't have, which is why they're trying to acquire a guy like, for example, Harrison Barnes, because of the fact that they do need that wing depth, right? When especially with Kemba Walker struggling, now you're asking Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum to pretty much do everything on offense, right? Because of the fact that you're not really surrounding them with anything else outside of those two. Jeff Teague has been absolutely terrible. He looks like he needs to retire if we're being real. Um, he's been terrible. Tristan Thompson is not going to be asked to carry the offensive load. He's good at what he does, but that's it. So it's been, I think, some of the issues with Boston have kind of been overstated and people panicking, because at the end of the day, this is a very good team. But they're just Marcus Smart missing, and again, as you talked about, they're kind of just that one more piece away from trying to get back to that spot that they once were. If they're able to get for example, a Harrison Barnes, then I think you could really see this team transform overnight. But right now, they're just in one of those, I think, mid-season funks that a lot of teams go through. And for me, as a championship contender, if you want to be serious about contending for a championship, unfortunately, you just can't go on droughts like this throughout the season. You can maybe like lose 2 or 3 games in a row, but to do what the Boston Celtics are doing right now, I can't see
It's
a
a free
contender
fall.
out of them. Yeah, it's a free fall right now.
Like,
And championship caliber teams we know don't have free falls like this in the season. The max, again, they'll go on is like a 2-3 game losing streak, right? They don't have free falls like
yeah,
this. And for that reason, I can't see Boston as a serious, true contender.
yeah.
Again, they do have championship aspirations, but for me too, I'm going to have to say that they're a pretender.
One more point quickly on the Celtics. I think a lot of people are kind of starting to realize is that Danny Ainge has a lot of blame to be taken for the Boston Celtics, uh, you know, struggles this season, and a lot of it has to do with him being very frugal and not, being opportunistic and taking it, going after players when he knows he has the assets to do it. He missed out on Kawhi, he missed out on Paul George, he missed out on a few other notable names out there that are slipping my head at the moment. So, they were in the sweepstakes for Anthony Davis too. So Boston has had ample of opportunities to go after star level talent. The problem is Danny Ainge has always turned it away or said the price was too high or wasn't willing to give up the assets to do so. And you're kind of seeing it now. It's kind of hurting them in that regard.
Case in point, not getting Miles Turner this summer, and we've seen what Miles Turner has done this year, right? Imagine Miles Turner being that guy for the Boston Celtics, how much better they would be.
Yeah.
So as you talked about, Danny Ainge, I think, also shares a part of the blame in the Boston Celtics struggles.
Yeah.
The final team we're going to talk about to round out our list is the Utah Jazz.
Most
Now,
popular team right now.
Yeah, the Utah Jazz have been, I think, by far the best team in the league, right? I think we can both say that. They've been the best team in the league so far. They have the league leading record. And they've taken a significant jump up from where they were last year. They were 10th in offensive rating last year. They're third this year. They were 13th last year in defensive rating. They're second this year. They own the first overall net rating this year, whereas they owned a ninth net rating last year. So the Utah Jazz overall have just been great everywhere across the board. They've been great on the boards. They're second in rebounds. They've been, the main story about them is that they've been shooting lights out. They've been shooting 39.7% from three, which is third in the league. And they're first in 3-point makes, right? They're first in 3-point attempts. So if you're shooting pretty much 40% from three, and you're taking the most threes in the league, that's a recipe for success. Now, again, as I'll talk about, is it really sustainable, especially in the playoffs? We're about to see. Again, this is a very weird year without fans, so maybe it is for this year. But yeah, in terms of specific players, everyone's been great. It starts with, Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert has been amazing on defense, as he always is. He's probably the league leading candidate in defensive player of the year once again. But the change in Rudy Gobert has been his offense, right? He's taking a bigger role on offense. He's been able to attract more attention on his dives. He's been a more willing dribbler and passer when he gets into the lane. Whereas before, if he got the ball and he couldn't get a lob or get a hook shot, he wasn't gonna do anything with the ball. Now he's expanded his game even more. He has much better chemistry with a guy like Mike Conley. They've been able to build up their chemistry after a year of working together, right? So Rudy Gobert starts with Rudy Gobert for the Utah Jazz success. The guy I was just talking about, Mike Conley, after his atrocious start last year, he's been absolutely brilliant this year. He's returned to Mike Conley form. He's built up a better chemistry with Rudy Gobert, where now he's being able to find him on those lobs, on those dives to the rim. Whereas before he was kind of more used to those short rolls and those pick and pops with Marc Gasol. So now he's being able to build up that rapport with Rudy Gobert, and he's shooting much better for them. Jordan Clarkson, he's been the sixth man of the year so far, and as we predicted, I think we're right on our prediction that he will be the sixth man of the year this year, averaging 18.3 points on 45.7% shooting and 38% from three. Jordan Clarkson has been absolutely amazing as the Utah Jazz bench gunner.
Didn't he have like a 40-point game off the bench?
Yeah, he did. Jordan Clarkson's been absolutely amazing for the Utah Jazz. Another guy that's kind of been lost in the shuffle is Derek Favors. Now, I was very surprised that the Utah Jazz were able to sign Derek Favors, and I was also excited that the Utah Jazz signed Derek Favors because of the fact that now with Derek Favors coming off the bench for you, it allows Utah to play the exact same way that they would with Rudy Gobert there on the court. Obviously, he doesn't have the same magnitude as Rudy Gobert, but Utah's allowed to play the same way. Whereas before, when Rudy Gobert checked out games last year, you'd have to play a completely different way with, for example, Tony Bradley coming to the game or whatever. You couldn't play the exact same way with Rudy Gobert not on the court. Now that you have Derek Favors, you're allowed to run the exact same system because Derek Favors can kind of be a worse version of Rudy Gobert on the court. And then finally, Bojan Bogdanovic being great as usual, Joe Ingles, Royce O'Neal, George Niang, and of course, they have their all-star Donovan Mitchell, who's doing his Donovan Mitchell thing. So overall, the Utah Jazz have been absolutely great. They've had another season of building their chemistry up, which has allowed their coach Quinn Snyder to open up his playbook even further and allow those guys to flourish. And I think the main question for them is, I've seen it a bit, are they the next 2015 Atlanta Hawks or the next 2014 San Antonio Spurs? I think that's a very good argument to be had. Obviously, we're not going to be able to find out until the playoffs. And when it comes to the playoffs, issues I think exist for the Utah Jazz where they kind of lack the firepower. Now, again, they are shooting great this season, but in terms of individually, I think they do kind of lack firepower, especially when they're going up against like the Clippers, the Lakers, the Denver Nuggets. You could see them struggle, have some problems to keep up with the scoring output. And then obviously, Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is the catalyst, the main part of this team. But we've seen that he's had his issues in the playoffs when teams specifically target him and make him come to the perimeter and try to abuse him on the perimeter. So, we're going to see if Quinn Snyder can mitigate some of those issues this year in the playoffs. And then finally, one more point. Every loss that the Utah Jazz have had is when a team was able to outshoot the Utah Jazz. Meaning the Utah Jazz, though they've been great, have kind of been limited in the success that they've had, where if a team is able to outshoot them, the Utah Jazz have not been able to kind of work around it and play a different style in order to win. So their wins have kind of been at the same way over and over again, which is fine in the regular season, but we know with game planning every single day in the playoffs and scouting at an all-time high, the Utah Jazz will have to adapt game to game. And so far, it's a recurring question of whether they'll be able to do that in the playoffs. For me personally, and then I'll let you go, I think the Utah Jazz have been great. I like watching them. Unfortunately for me, it's just the Clippers and Lakers are just there, man. I think I'm just going to have to say, until I can see it with my own eyes, because this has kind of been a recurring theme for the Utah Jazz, but until I can see it with my own eyes, I'm going to unfortunately have to classify Utah as a pretender. Now, I'd love for them to be an actual contender, but again, I have to see it with my own eyes, to be honest.
I've actually, quietly followed the Utah Jazz for a little bit of time now. And I've always kind of admired what they've been doing from afar. I really liked the acquisition of Donovan Mitchell. I thought that was an amazing move by the front office. Gobert has been fantastic. Even the Mike Conley move that we talked about on a previous episode when it first happened, we actually really liked it for the Jazz. We thought that's exactly what they need. And even some of the role players, getting Bojan Bogdanovic, amazing signing. Royce O'Neal was a great developmental role player who has really established a good role in their system. And Joe Ingles has been doing his Joe Ingles thing. Joe Ingles has always been a fantastic player in this league. And then, not to mention, you bring in a guy like Jordan Clarkson, a six man of the year candidate, and has given you that spark plug off the bench, which filled a weakness Utah had in previous seasons where they didn't really get a lot of secondary scoring. Now they got that. Then they went out and they fixed an issue they had last season where they didn't really have a good backup center behind Gobert. Well, now you have Derek. You went and got Derek Favors back. So the Utah has slowly but kind of put together a pretty solid roster, on both ends of the floor. And I think now you're seeing kind of everything kind of click together for them where, they're getting the scoring on top of the defense. Then you're getting the shooting. Now you're getting the consistency. And this is a team, man. Like, this is a team with a good coach. They move the ball. They play the game the right way. They have a young stud who is their main option. You also have a defensive anchor in the paint. Then you have a secondary guard who facilitates, a couple of scorers and Bogdanovich and Jingles. And I'm not gonna lie, I really, really like this team, man. On paper, I think from a depth standpoint, from an overall just roster construction standpoint, this is probably one of the best examples I've seen so far in the league. And it shows, man. It just shows that when you build a team the right way, and you develop them, you give them time to grow, you can see the benefits to that. And the Jazz have been great this season. Now, am I gonna say I've watched every single Utah Jazz game? No, I haven't really been following them, but I've seen their record, and the numbers don't lie. The fact that they're like 25-6 right now of a record is pretty insane right now. Like that,
They've beaten good teams as well.
they've beaten good teams, man. Like they've established themselves as being legitimately a good team this season. But I think it comes right back to your point that you made about, is this an instance of the 2015 Hawks who had a great regular season only to flame out in the playoffs, or 24?
I mean, they didn't flame out. They ran to LeBron.
Oh yeah, we had that for the Raptors like every single year. But regardless, the Hawks didn't play great in the playoffs that year anyways to begin with. Or are you the 2014 Spurs, which means that you're the start of a pretty consistent dynasty, or being able to be a championship team that built your team the right way. So I don't know. Like, I think I would love for them to be a contender, because I think they have a lot of the pieces put in place. But man, you're going up against LeBron and AD, Kawhi and PG, and I don't know if this team has the talent to overcome that. And so for now, I'm gonna have to put them as a pretender as well, man. Just based on that fact that how realistic is it for them to win a championship? Sure, they have all the pieces to do it, but is it realistically gonna happen? The odds are kind of heavily against it.
And that's what it comes down to, right? We're not defining contender as someone who has championship aspirations, because clearly Utah wants to win a championship and they're in a prime position to do it. But it's whether or not we think they're in that top tier of championship contenders.
It's
right?
also if they're gonna win. Like, if you're not gonna
Yeah.
win a championship, you're not really a contender. If you don't have a legitimate and realistic case to win a championship, you're not really a contender.
Exactly. And then before people start going crazy about me comparing it to the 2014 Spurs, I'm not saying the players are the same. Obviously, Tim Duncan and Kawhi Leonard and whatnot. But I'm talking from the sense of a great team with very good players who are not at their peak, right? Kawhi Leonard was not at his peak yet, and Tim Duncan and Tony and Manu were declining by that time. But a bunch of very good players who play very well as a team, right? That's
Yeah.
what I mean, and are able to win a championship, whereas Atlanta was not able to win a championship. That's what I mean about the 2014 Spurs. So don't come after me. Oh, dude, I'm saying Rudy Gobert is the next Tim Duncan or something.
They're also a deep team. Like that's another comparison you can make to that Spurs team. Is that this Utah team is a very deep team, and you need depth in the playoffs. Like I don't care what anybody says. You need start the playoffs is where stars shine, yeah, but you need supporting players. You need good role players, and Utah has some good role players, man. But yeah, those overall, man, those were kind of our breakdowns on some of the teams that are in the championship pursuit. Let us know what you guys think. Do you agree or disagree? Who would you classify as a true contender, or who is actually a pretender? Let us know what you guys think. But with that, to conclude this episode, we want to jump into the up and under segment for this week. A lot of things happened. First of which, are you up or under on the East and Western Conference All-Stars being announced? Now, I would put up a list, but I'm sure I'll throw up on the screen for YouTube. But there are some notable snubs from the All-Star selection. In particular, you're looking at Domantas Sabonis, Fred VanVleet among one, and Trae Young. Devin Booker would have been one, but he was actually recently named an All-Star to be an injury replacement for Anthony Davis. So are you up or under on the All-Stars in general being announced, and do you have any major concerns with that?
Listen, man, there's always something you could say about the All-Star teams, but for me, I'm up. I think they nailed it for the most part. I think we got our predictions for the most part right.
Our starters are pretty accurate.
Our starters were pretty accurate. There's a couple of players you could change here or there. But in terms of, we didn't have Zion Williamson in the All-Star game. We said he has a very good chance to make it.
We made a case for him.
And then there was a lot of outrage about Devin Booker and Chris Paul. Now, I literally called this when we talked about our Western Conference All-Stars, right? I said we have Devin Booker in the All-Star game, but I feel and I believe that the coaches will vote in Chris Paul. Why? Because Chris Paul is the main catalyst, the anchor, the leader of that team, and the coaches value that higher than a scorer like Devin Booker, which is why I said Chris Paul will likely make it over Devin Booker, and he did. Now, Devin Booker obviously got in because Anthony Davis got injured, so good for Devin Booker. And then when we're talking about snubs, well, again, I said Ben Simmons was an All-Star. Hani disagreed with me. But
I still do.
Nah.
16 points as an All-Star?
Doesn't matter, man. Bro. Doesn't matter, bro. Nah. He's arguably the best defensive player in the league. You think Rudy Gobert shouldn't make the All-Star team then?
I was not. I mean, as far as like a big, he's really the only other big that you can put in there. Like, who else are you gonna who are you gonna put in the West? Who are you gonna put in? Like, I don't really, I can't really think of anybody. I can off the top of my head that I can put in over Gobert. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. I can't.
In the East, you can make that argument for Ben Simmons because there are guys who were there.
Okay, so that brings me up to my point, right? A lot of people are arguing about different players. But the main thing people have to realize is that if you're gonna make an argument about for a player, you have to be willing to replace somebody. Right?
Yeah, that's the hard part.
A lot of people miss, right? A lot of people are like, "Oh, Domantas Sabonis should have made it." Well, I completely agree with Domantas Sabonis should have made it. But who are you gonna take out, right? Does Nikola Vucevic deserve to be taken out? Not in my opinion, but that's a toss-up of what you decide, right? Fans will go out and be mad about, Trae Young didn't make it. But who are you going to replace Zach LaVine with Trae Young, right? You have to give a requisite, you have to give a replacement for the player. You can't just say, this guy got snubbed, because there's only 12 spots. That's why it's the All-Star game, right? There's only 12 spots per team. So people have to realize that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it is what it is. There's only 12 spots. But I think the criteria to make an All-Star game needs to be a little bit more ironed out as far as who is legitimately an All-Star. Like, is it someone who puts up great numbers, or is it someone who puts up great numbers on a team that's actually performing well? Because that comes back to the case that you made about Sabonis. He's putting up just as good numbers as Vucevic is, but his team is doing far better. Wouldn't you argue that that's better? But Vucevic is on a team that's decimated with injuries. it really comes down to that. And then also when I can bring up for the same point for Fred VanVleet, you know, a guy who on the team who was a fifth seeded Raptors. You know, if people are still stuck on the 2-8 start, well, what have you been seeing for the last like 20 games after that? You know, so it really comes down to, I think they need to iron out the criteria a little better.
And also the Bradley Beal situation last year,
There
right?
you go. Yeah.
Where, you know, if the coaches didn't have Bradley Beal making it last year because of the fact that his team sucked, why do they have him this year then, right? Because
Well,
his
he
team is
got the
doing the
fan
exact same
vote.
thing they did last year.
But,
Yeah, well, that's the difference, right?
yeah.
Bradley Beal was able to get the fan vote because of the fact that the coaches didn't vote him in last year. But it comes down to my point of what I said when we made our All-Star predictions for the East. If Bradley Beal is not able to get that fan vote, would the coaches put him in? Or would it be the bias of, oh, we didn't put him in last year, we're going to put him in this year, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people there. I do agree that some of the details need to be ironed out. It's just whether it's possible to even iron out, right? Because it's such a loose definition of an all-star.
Yeah.
And you know, like there's not really much the NBA can do, if we're being honest. Like I don't know what you can concretely change about the all-star selections. So I think overall though, I think we're pretty satisfied with the all-star team.
I mean,
Right?
nobody
There were
really
a
wants to
couple
play
of
the
players
game
here.
still. No one still wants to play the
No,
game.
well,
So.
I mean, we've literally talked about it to death, man. Like,
Yeah.
we the All-Star game should not be happening in the first place, bro. Like, that's the problem, right? So, I mean, what do you guys think about, you know, the All-Star rosters? You know, like, you guys, who would you guys rather have, right? If you guys have any snubs, make sure to say who you're gonna replace them with.
Yeah.
That moves us on to our next topic, of the Houston Rockets releasing DeMarcus Cousins. So, are you up or under on this move?
Um, I think I'm up on it for both sides. I think for the Rockets, they really found out that Christian Wood is their future at the center position. And he does a lot more things and he's a lot younger. You can do more defensively and offensively with Christian Wood than you can with DeMarcus Cousins. And I think for DeMarcus Cousins, I think he wants to be in a situation, at least in this stage in the career, where he can go out and win a championship. And right now, at least legitimately, like he's been on championship rosters, but he's not actually been the catalyst to win one. So,
Well, I mean, technically, he hasn't been on a championship roster, but he was on the unofficial
it's very
organization
confusing.
for the Lakers, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's very confusing for DeMarcus Cousins, but I think he wants to legitimately go out and win a championship, and it's good for him. I think a contender will look into him and pick him up. Maybe the Lakers might pick him up again, or hell, maybe the Clippers might go after him. Who really knows? But I think it's good for both sides. Like Houston gets to move on, and go in a direction that they feel better suits their timeline, and they allow DeMarcus to have the freedom to do as he wants for his career as well.
you know, I've seen people talk about, oh, Houston should have done that. DeMarcus Cousins did this. DeMarcus. Let's be real, bro. You guys are caught up on the DeMarcus Cousins name power.
Yeah.
If we're being brutally honest, he has not been good at all this year, right? That's the
He's been
honest truth.
okay.
Now again, no, he hasn't. He has not been good.
At least from what I've
Now
seen.
again, it's not. I can't put the blame on him because injuries have unfortunately just killed his career.
Yeah.
But Houston's not going anywhere clearly, and DeMarcus Cousins is just playing bad on a bad team. So you might as well be able to take a role as a deep bench piece on a championship contender, and at least be able to not put up the stats and be able to sacrifice minutes in order to at least achieve something worthwhile in a championship, right? So I think it's, again, as you said, I'm definitely up on it from both sides.
Yeah. So moving on. So now this is a bit of a sticky situation. So Minnesota did a thing, and no, it's not winning because they're just not capable of doing that. But are you up or under on the Minnesota Timberwolves firing Ryan Saunders and then actually just hiring Raptors assistant Chris Finch basically within the same night, and so basically overlooking current assistant and former Trailblazers assistant David Vanderpool for the job, and Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum were not happy about that. So are you up or under on the whole situation regarding Minnesota? The firing of Ryan Saunders, the hiring of Chris Finch, and the overlooking of other candidates that they might have been able to go to take a look at?
Um, I would say I'm under on it from, I think, mainly the optics point of view.
Yeah.
It's not a good. It doesn't look like a good situation from the Timberwolves side of things, and especially when you just look at what the Timberwolves organization is, right? A dysfunctional organization, and so this move does not help them in that regard. Now, am I opposed to them firing Ryan Saunders and hiring Chris Finch? No, I'm not, because I said Ryan Saunders kind of needed to be fired last year, if I'm being honest. Um, and hiring Chris Finch, I think, was a good move for them, especially it indicates a recurring problem for them, which is Glenn Taylor, their owner. And this literally indicates that Garson Rosas, who had ties with Chris Finch in Houston, Chris Finch was likely his number one candidate to start the season as the Timberwolves head coach. But what happened was Glenn Taylor probably told Garson Rosas to hire Ryan Saunders instead, whereas Garson Rosas did not want to, and he wanted to hire Chris Finch. And this is exactly how it played out because of the fact that he didn't even look at David Vanderpool. Now, I don't believe that Garson Rosas had any bad intent to it. It's just, he wanted to hire Chris Finch, his friend. But again, in the time that we're in, uh, you know, again, I guess bad optics, like I'm not really opposed to it, but I can see where some people might have a problem, especially with, David Vanderpool, him being there and him just being passed on right away. And then finally, just I think the situation was very interesting too because of the fact that I can't remember the last time. I think it might be like Lionel Hollins or somebody that the last time an assistant got hired in the middle of a season. And
Well,
what's
yeah.
interesting is that the Timberwolves literally just played the Raptors, and then one game later, Chris Finch is their new head coach, right? So I think this is a very weird situation from all angles. But yeah, no, I don't know. I feel like I think it was a right move for the Timberwolves. I think they just didn't play their
Yeah.
cards well, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it, man. Like, I think the optics side of things, it was definitely a weird situation that Minnesota kind of created. Like, sure, you fired Ryan Saunders, and again, I've always kind of defended Ryan Saunders that maybe he doesn't really have the talent to do anything with, and his schemes weren't always that bad, at least from what I've seen out of them. But you can't deny you have Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley. You have talent on that team, so you shouldn't be this poor. So yeah, I don't mind that he got fired because at this point you've had some time to get it right, and if you don't, you don't. It's a make or miss league, as we all know. So that's fine with me. And then hiring Chris Finch again. Chris Finch is a very good assistant coach, like very good coach. He has a lot of experience coaching at multiple different levels, and I think he definitely deserved the head coaching role. He has a lot more experience than Ryan Saunders, so that's definitely a thing that had an advantage. But so I don't mind him getting the job. I do mind that David Vanderpool got passed over when he was there. He wasn't even considered or wasn't even given time to be the interim coach to see what he can do. So like maybe like Minnesota could have hired Chris Finch in the offseason. They didn't really have to do it, you know, this like right away, but I guess they wanted their guy. And I also don't really like the narrative that people are making that another black coach got passed over for a white one. You know, at some point you can't just keep labeling that for every single black coach that doesn't get an opportunity. And I get it. There is a scarcity of black coaches that haven't gotten those opportunities. But I don't think this was a case now, and I think it's more so in the lines of what you were saying, where Glenn Taylor, kind of forced, Ryan Saunders to be there when the general manager kind of wanted um, Chris Finch, is a longtime friend that he's known for quite some time, to be there. So I think that's more so the case. But
Not to mention, Garson Rosas is Latino, so it's not like he's
yeah,
white either. Right? He's a person of color as well.
yeah,
So I think the whole narrative of the black coach being passed over in this case, I don't think for me it was really justified. Now again, is there an issue? There is you can definitely make a case for an issue in the NBA, in the NFL especially. I think the fact that Eric Bieniemy has not gotten a job I think it's crazy.
I
But
don't think he
I
wanted any
think
of those jobs, if I'm being real.
well, I mean, if I was him, I wouldn't accept that Houston job
No,
either, bro.
absolutely not.
Absolutely not. But yeah, like it was a very bad optic situation for the Timberwolves. But I can't criticize the
Yeah,
move that they actually made, right?
yeah.
And that's what it is. Finally, are you up or under on the Dallas Mavericks? According to a report, they were shopping Kristaps Porzingis. However, Mark Cuban himself later denied that completely and shut that report down. So, are you up or under on the situation surrounding Kristaps Porzingis, and if you were, a possible trade for him?
Believe it or not, I'm actually kind of up on it. Now, players are able to be traded. Like, there isn't a circumstance where a team will not at least answer or at least shop a player to say, hey, what could I possibly get for this guy? And I think in the case of Porzingis, injuries have really taken a toll. Like, it's taken him some time to recover off of these knee surgeries he's had over the last couple of seasons. And we've seen it with big men. The ACL is one of the toughest injuries for big men to come back from. And Porzingis hasn't really been that same guy for the Mavs. And, you know, I think for the Mavs, I think they're kind of looking at it like, hey, we like Porzingis, but could we get something better for him? I think that was more so the case. And Mark Cuban denying it, he's supposed to deny it. Like, what is he supposed to really do? Um, so I'm up on the fact that what I would look at what could I get for this guy. He's not really he's been good for me, but he hasn't really been great for me. Could I possibly trade him for a great player? Maybe. I mean, but I only find out if I take a look. So I don't blame them.
Yeah, Kristaps Porzingis was brought into Dallas to be Luka's co-star. Unfortunately, as we know, for 7-foot guys, if you have knee injuries or lower body injuries, that pretty much spells doom for your career, right? And Kristaps Porzingis has been no exception to that. Um, Interesting side note: I think everyone, for the most part, hated on the Knicks for that Kristaps Porzingis deal, but they might have actually won that deal if we're
Nah,
being
I'm not
honest.
ready to concede yet.
I mean, there's still some time, but
I'm not
the
conceding
way
yet.
that it's going right now, the New York Knicks might have come out on the better side of that deal, which is very interesting.
Nah, we'll
But yeah,
see.
in terms of going back to Dallas' point of view, like Luka's still a very young player, so you still have time, but you never want to waste a superstar like Luka Doncic, right? Ask LeBron how he felt in Cleveland, right? You don't want to waste years of a superstar like Luka Doncic. So if you can get someone better for Kristaps Porzingis, shoot, man, explore it. Problem is, I don't think you will. Like, there's not
Yeah.
really much you can do with Kristaps Porzingis given his contract, right? So, yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I think for Dallas, you might as well just shop him. But
Yeah.
again, considering they're not going to get anybody for him, it makes complete sense that Mark Cuban will just deny it because you don't want to cause any problems with one of your star players, right? So
Yeah. I mean, we'll see what happens with Porzingis. It's gonna be ongoing, but I don't blame them for what they're doing. But with that, that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show and on the various podcasting platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, uh, even now YouTube. Basically, wherever you can find a podcast, you can find us with the Up and Under Podcast. Also, check us out on social media, Twitter and Instagram at @UpLetterN_podcast, Facebook.com/Up and Under Podcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or a reaction to news, like our reaction to the All-Star picks as they occur. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. Also check out our website, upandunderpodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's basically a place where you can either listen to the episodes or even read a blog post with every single episode if you don't have time to listen to the whole thing. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so already. And yeah, man, we're getting very close to that midway point of the season. More craziness is gonna happen with the trade deadline. So
that'll be interesting.
yeah, and the NBA actually just released the second half of the schedule. So yeah, we're getting closer to the end of the season. So we're gonna see what happens, man. But yeah, with that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.